Hello, and welcome to today's presentation titled, Can You Say Cloud DR? My name is Megan, and I will be your moderator for today's webinar. Today's presentation will be presented by John Feehan and Gregory Cody, both of TÜV Rheinland OpenSky. John Feehan has 20 years of experience securing IT infrastructures, improving governance and risk management, and maximizing the value of IT partnerships. He has worked with teams at companies in consumer packaged goods, telecom services, and other industries. He specializes in mobilizing teams mired in chaos to establish a healthy culture, clear workflows, effective reporting, and achievement of business value from IT. John is a U.S. Army veteran and earned a BS in electrical engineering from Duke University. Greg Cody has over 25 years of experience building and leading technical teams. His core strengths and expertise include business continuity and disaster recovery, ITIL and IT service management, security operations, and program and project management. He has provided disaster recovery strategy, planning, implementation, and testing services to mid-sized and large enterprise customers in the healthcare, pharma, real estate, security services, and entertainment industries. Greg has a Bachelor of Science in Electrical Engineering. For today's presentation, each of you is in listen-only mode. We encourage you all to submit questions via the chat box function. Questions will be answered during a question and answer session at the end of the presentation if the time permits. Also, please note that the presentation is available for download in the handout section. At this time, I'd like to go ahead and turn things over to John. John, please go ahead.
Thank you, Megan. I appreciate folks taking the time today to join this webinar. Can you say Cloud DR, or what we recognize a little late, is really what Greg and I want to share as our experiences around knowing when moving to Cloud DR is worth the effort, probably a better title. So first, a little bit about who we are, just one slide. We're part of TÜV Rheinland Group, been working in safety, testing, and certification for 147 years now, starting during the Industrial Revolution, continuing during the advent of mass production, electricity, through electronics, the advent of IT as we know it, and Greg and I are part of TÜV Rheinland OpenSky. And we help our clients manage risk and compliance, defend against today's cyber threats, to diversify with secure cloud, extending TÜV Rheinland Group's mission of safety. So again, today's topic, when is moving to Cloud DR worth the effort? Basically, we're going to take a look at how economics have changed. The new costs of DR, there've always been several ways to provide DR application protection. The cloud, the economics of cloud are quite different. We're going to touch bases at the stage with the key technology differences. We touch upon security controls, especially those that are a tad different in the cloud, and then close with steps to get one to effective Cloud DR.
Thanks, John. So who are the best candidates or optimal candidates for migrating to the cloud for the DR environment? We believe it's those that are hosting their DR on-prem, right, at a colo facility, hosting a private cloud, whether that be on-prem or at a colo facility, or with a DR facility provider. We also believe that CIOs and IT executives that are facing a big DR equipment refresh in the near future, a year to year and a half out, are definitely great candidates for that, for Cloud DR. And we believe that's one of the most compelling areas, cost being a key component there. Also, those companies that have a security policy in place that allows for adoption within the cloud. That is another area. Many companies still are averse to deploying within the cloud. But more and more are understanding the benefits and security improvements certainly have been made within cloud providers. So there's more of a sense in that direction for folks that were tentative in the past.
And so in this first section, we're going to just touch upon some of the differences between legacy DR solutions and cloud DR, just to set the stage, because we're going to be speaking to these when we speak about the economics. So if we look at a legacy DR situation, there's often a facilities provider that provides the facility, the power, HVAC, access, and physical security for a recurring fee. And the enterprise, you provide the compute, storage, network services. Often you own this equipment. Network services includes authentication, DNS, etc., to help things run, and the protected application, that application data in its database. So if we compare that to cloud DR, public cloud DR specifically, the provider here supplies the basics, facility, power, HVAC, those are the same, but also this time now provides compute, storage, network, hardware, and licensing. And we'll get into some of those details for a fee. So that is no longer the enterprise, no longer enterprise equipment. You of course still have to provide and set up network services, the protected application data, and its database.
Yeah, further to John's point, we'd like to highlight some differences between the responsibilities of management and maintenance, right, of the underlying infrastructure. So with a traditional on-premise approach, the enterprise is responsible for managing and maintaining everything from the underlying infrastructure, the components of the network storage servers, all the way up to the application. Within public cloud, specifically infrastructure as a service, that underlying infrastructure, that hardware components are now fully managed by and provided by the cloud provider. The client is now responsible solely for the operating system, the middleware, data, and application. What changes as well as folks adopt more services and advanced services from cloud providers, you may move from infrastructure as a service to platform as a service. In that situation, the cloud provider takes on even more responsibility, and the customer is primarily responsible at that point for their application and the data only. So we would like to highlight a couple of differences here as it relates to your IT service management processes, ITIL-based processes. They change with the cloud. Traditionally, asset management was a process-heavy effort for large organizations because of all the assets they're managing, right down to the server, storage arrays, all kinds of infrastructure components. That's changed with the cloud. No longer are you managing hardware assets and hardware configuration items with infrastructure as a service. You're managing the operating systems, right, and those configurations and parameters. You're managing virtual private clouds that you've built with the various components, firewalls, load balancers, VMs, and those sorts of things. So there's a significant change there to be aware of. Change management is another area that needs some attention, we believe. And that's mainly around the fact that one of the key benefits, besides cost efficiencies with deploying within the cloud, are the agility and the speed to market, right? Turning up services, turning down services. Lots of organizations, mature organizations, have very rigorous change control processes. One of the things that needs to be considered here is they have to be modified to support and to be able to take advantage of those benefits of the cloud, as I just mentioned. So those are things like predefined changes, standard changes. So a bit of effort has to go into that to ensure that the changes don't take as long as they might have in the past in a traditional setting. Another area is incident and event management. Key here is there are platforms within the providers. So AWS has CloudWatch, and other providers have other tools. The ultimate goal is so that they provide great visibility, but what I think the ultimate goal for organizations would be is to integrate those solutions into their existing platforms, right? Incident and event management platforms, systems like ServiceNow being an example. And then capacity management is another area we wanted to highlight. It's something traditionally capacity management in IT world started with mainframes, very big, expensive, slow to deploy hardware and infrastructure. It was out of necessity based on the high costs. And many organizations adopted capacity management throughout their IT infrastructure. So now that changes a bit because the vendor is responsible for performing that on the hardware, right? The infrastructure is more, so it becomes more of a kind of a license management effort, really, as opposed to capacity. Certainly need to keep an eye on what's licensed, what's been provisioned out there for VMs, and ensure that the key, I think, on that side would be unused, right? Underutilization. Many VMs provisioned you're paying for that you're not using. So I wanted to touch on that point. And then IT operations. One of the key changes here with your VMs. It's kind of a mantra, if you will, for cloud and cloud providers and working in the cloud is view your VMs as cattle, not pets, right? Not customized. View them as numbered servers, right? You can kind of die off and you just kind of spin up a new one. So it's less effort. And that ties to the next item we wanted to talk about was there's less IT implementation and maintenance activities at the hardware level. So folks' resources could be better utilized in other areas, more strategic activities. And then another last point on this is around the skill set. There's a slight change now because of the automation and the capabilities provided by the cloud providers that folks are now tending to be a little bit more script and software related, right? Those activities. So there's a slight change in skill sets to note there.
And so with that common framework, we're going to take a look at how the economics are a bit different. So again, for this, going to make up this scenario, business application to be protected. It has a SQL database of 700 terabytes. That includes backup storage. Comes to 3 racks of compute, 2 racks of storage. And the DR plan calls for a warm infrastructure, but the business application itself and its database will be restored from backup in case a disaster is declared. So that's just the structure in a legacy DR solution. What we see in the neighborhood of some capital expense, the network has to be purchased, compute, storage. Even if you purchase and then lease, you're still the owner of this kit. At the end of the lease, you'd still have it. So it's still considered an asset. It would show up as a capital expense. Storage expense is shown here. You'd additionally have the facility. And I just put 15% for maintenance to make the math easy. Often see 13 to 15%. That would be recurring for annual. And that's a legacy environment. So if we protected the same application in cloud DR solution, the costs we see would look a little different. So for one thing, you see the capital expenses are largely missing because, as I said, the public cloud provider owns the kit, owns the licensing for that. And the fee for that shows up on the operational expense side as a cloud provider fee. You still have to pay for circuits. There'd still be probably a little bit of licensing, maybe for the that would be involved. That would be customized based on your application. You pay for storage, and to get to the cloud DR, assuming that this is a new step, then put in some one-time operational expense for the project to get you there, to build out that environment and to test and help your team do that. So if we put these side by side, so we can see the differences. And the compelling economic differences, the biggest one is the larger portion of capital expense that's required in the legacy. So that's avoided in the cloud. you pay for. You're just paying for it over time in operational expense. The recurring operational expense for public cloud is often larger because you're having to pay for some of that. Now, it sounds like to novices, to most of us, that it would kind of be a toss-up. But to your CFO and your finance group, avoiding a capital cost is a wonderful thing to do. Absolutely wonderful, because businesses have a limited number. They show up on their balance assets, show up on the balance sheet, and deploying capital has to be done very, very carefully. In any way they can avoid that so they can invest more in the core business, they love that. We're seeing that storage can be cheaper, but storage costs, depending on the age of your kit, what sort of refresh is needed, can vary wildly. So I'd caution against using these numbers, this sort of a model. They're real numbers modeled off of work we've done with clients and their situations, but situations can be considerably different based on the application and, as I mentioned, the age of the legacy storage and what you're talking about, having to refresh or upgrade. One thing about the public cloud that should be noted also is the provision capacity can be lower. You can build out a smaller environment. Because it scales easily and readily, you just have to build out your warm environment, and you'd be able to scale up in compute and in storage when you need to restore your application and its database. So you'd only need to scale up in times of DR exercise or actual declaration of a disaster. And so month in, month out. The rest of the time, you're paying for a smaller environment. So, point on the costs here is, so a while back I was doing a cloud archive proof of concept business case for a consumer packaged goods client. In their particular case, their archive requirement was driving a slow but steady growth in storage. They kept their backups, including archive backups, regulatory legal hold, and the running database, all on premise on the same shared storage investment. Well, they were getting to a point, they were about 6-9 months out, where a few more disks, now you need you need to expand the frame, and then there's the licensing, and then the backup solution licensing. Altogether, they were looking at $200,000 of pending expansion. And so we're exploring if we could get some of the older archive, regulatory-driven archive storage off into the cloud, that we could avoid that the upcoming spend. So that was pretty desirable. The economics looked really, really strong. But one thing I want to mention is that cloud services are still changing very, very rapidly, and their pricing changes continuously. Azure at that time had recently come out with a cold storage to rival AWS's Glacial, which was pretty attractive. And they had joint solutions with Commvault, so that you could actually purchase Commvault Media Agent and tie into your system. So you had one set of unified policies to sort your backups. But I guess the point is that don't take too much weight on these particular costs. You really need to dig in to your own situation. They can vary from time to time. So what you would do in comparing your costs is put together a business case. And this is very simplified just from this example. I have the details of cloud hosted DR up top, and I've summarized them in the cloud DR cost row. And then from the other table, where I don't show the details, I do bring the totals across in the legacy. So legacy DR cost just below it. So we can do a direct comparison. And you see the big difference here is year one capital expense. Big hit legacy, refresh, or build out cloud DR, much, much lighter. But then if you look in the years, I've extended it to year 2, year 3, just take a 3-year look, which is reasonable. Finance is pretty much okay with that. Sometimes you can look 5 if you want to go further. You will see that the yearly operational expense for cloud is higher as it goes along. We often see a bit of savings in storage. And in this case, after 3 years, cloud DR is still a tad cheaper, but again, you have that annual expense. So, that it shows this is the sort of the structure of the model that would be really, really helpful. So I was investigating SAP ERP, looking into the real costs using a business case and cost analysis. And I would actually go into finance and understand the assumptions, understand where the cost allocations are coming from and how they create the estimates. Also got depreciation and found that depreciation was not reported to IT. It was kept in a different table. They were getting hit with the annual depreciation charge, but what was being depreciated was kind of a mystery because it was hands off. So Doug reached out and found that table. And what we learned in that particular case is what they're paying for every year. Over half of their SAP expense for the year that they thought was the infrastructure required for SAP was actually depreciation. Now, they had bought SAP under a perpetual license over 8 years ago. But the improvement projects, every time they modified SAP, its data sets or its workflows, they would capitalize that because it was an asset improvement. And not to get into the details, but that does allow for capitalization of those types of services expenses. And it was such a great thing. They loved it. They just kept doing it. And over the years, paying off those projects were more than half. So it really helped refresh the understanding of what their IT infrastructure costs for supporting SAP were. So it's important to dig in here. Greg, I think you had an experience on depreciation here?
Yes, I did, right? So, but that dynamic, and I was going to raise this point later, John, but that dynamic is kind of changed a bit, right? I think with organizations where previously folks did have that view on depreciating, right, their assets and so on. Now there seems to be more of an appetite, right, toward expenses, right, operating expenses. So, but yeah, and I've certainly seen in the past with some software and the underlying hardware with an organization I was with, they took all of the costs and depreciated those because that was more beneficial to them financially.
So this shows one of the actual business cases for that I've created for a client in the past. It's been sterilized, but actual business cases are and need to be more complex. And this was built with the finance rep for client's IT, so that they are comfortable with how it was built and structured. If you reach out, we'd be happy at any time to have a conversation, and I'd be happy to share these past business cases, explain how they're built, why they were built that way, or to review what you're doing and help brainstorm. Just have a call and grab us. We'd be happy to do that.
And just one more point on that topic. Related to CapEx versus OpEx, the key thing here is to understand what the organization, your executives prefer on how to treat these costs before developing the business case. You'll probably save yourself quite a bit of time, so just something to keep in mind. The next topic here is security. How is it different within the cloud? And one of the key things here is that you really need to fully and thoroughly vet your cloud provider to understand what security capabilities they have in place, their service level objectives as it relates to availability, typically within their SLAs. Some of the items to look for, that segmenting of subnets, deploying DMZs for security zoning, avoiding exposure to the internet with dedicated WAN and cloud exchange links. Also, many of these providers have services, additional security services, right, such as credential management, IAM type capabilities. They also encrypt data for you. As far as securing, some areas of focus related to the security of your information within the cloud. Safeguarding your sensitive data is probably of the utmost importance, right? And that PHI, PII type data, proprietary information, that's the key there, right? So safeguarding that information. So encrypted data, even if, I mean, I think it's largely an industry recommendation here in the consulting world that the providers have good encryption, but for peace of mind, probably better for you folks to encrypt your own data at rest and in transit. That is of utmost importance. Know where your data is. Right, that's a key aspect here because of compliance requirements. If you're in the health industry, you have HIPAA, right, kind of governing your data and your activities around that data. Some of the key requirement there is the data has to stay within the states, right? So if you're using a cloud provider and you're not properly configuring where your data sits in the areas, the zones, and that type of information, you could be at risk, right? So it's very important to know where your data is. In this changing world, SLAs, you're managing against those SLAs now, but make sure they meet your business requirements and satisfy your compliance requirements. That's a key area as well. And then another topic here is shared responsibility model around security. And that's very similar to what we had previously discussed and reviewed above regarding management responsibilities, right? What's the difference between a cloud provider or what you do on-prem? The security aspect of that changes similarly. So as infrastructure as a service, the hardware is the security responsibility of the provider, the cloud provider. You're responsible as you go up the stack. So those two are tightly aligned there, but we believe it's an important note to just be aware of what you're responsible for and put the proper controls in place if there are gaps.
So now we're going to take a look at what it takes to get to Cloud DR. So here is a path, a common path. In red, you see a common project timeline, but do want to highlight the importance of the business case and the update of the strategy. It's a bit different. It is not planning the project. Some of the, besides the financials, making sure it's the right move and it's worth the effort. Identify the app that's a good fit for public cloud. Look for suitability, an app you're going to protect. Even if you have some risk, IBM risk architecture in the compute, that would narrow your provider to IBM, because Azure and AWS doesn't provide risk architectures in their public clouds. Things like that. You want to sort of make sure the DR plan is still applicable. And you want to sell this and get the business agreement. You want finance on board. You definitely need operations on board to make this sort of change. And you probably want to identify a partner to help you with that, who can contribute a little bit to the planning. Because you need to understand and be able to communicate their involvement. In red, the project plan itself is about a 9 to 12 month process in total, including the business case up front. And we don't recommend you bundling this with an application replatforming. So if there's a major redevelopment going on with the application, that's the project. That should be the driver. It's nesting the two, is not necessarily beneficial. That replatforming may involve hosting in the cloud, may involve DR in the cloud. That's fine, but that initiative would drive. So later, when you do accomplish, you get to the point where you avoid the CapEx spend before the refresh is due. It allows you to, because as Greg mentioned, where a lot of the low-level system administration has been shifted to a provider, it allows you to realign your staff, free up that time, and really intentionally apply them in other directions that are more helpful. And also, once it's in place, having that instance and having that data in the cloud opens it up to other opportunities. Maybe you find that your users used to use the WAN to access that business application. Now it'd be quite easy to have them access via the internet, getting that traffic off of your wide area network, maybe allowing you to trim some of that capacity down and save additional money. You, of course, easily expand archive storage for other apps in that new environment. And your data's right there and makes it easier to do data analytics because of the scalability. You can stand up the compute necessary and your extra storage for database cubes, however you wish to do it. Or even an environment you can expand easily to host new apps coming in the door.
The final topic we'd like to talk about is your DR program management activities, or IT service continuity management. Although your DR plans and your DR procedures, test procedures, and those sorts of detailed documents as it relates to the technology, inventories, and so on, that changes with the cloud based on some of the items we discussed earlier. But overall, the framework and approach taken to manage your DR program should not change, right? So there's some tried and true methods, practices, right? Industry-leading practices. Our program is aligned with ISO 27031, and in a larger part to business continuity management, ISO 22301. So what our model here, as you see on the left, is it's policy and program development, performing business impact analysis and risk analysis periodically, ideally 1.5 to 2 years out, where you're integrating both of those. So your impact analysis is integrating the most likely risks, right? So you're focusing on the most likely, probable, and impactful risks. Then you have the development of your recovery strategies, right? Cloud DR is an aspect of that. Then you plan and implement, right? And John just referred to some of the planning. Then you implement, deploy. The next area of focus would be around training individuals, especially those that are expected to participate in recovery activities, and test, right? Periodically test. That is key. And then manage and govern, right? So this is kind of a continual process, and there's a continuous improvement aspect to it. What you see on the right is the Deming Cycle, and that's really the ISO standard 27031 is based on that approach. It's plan, do, check, act. And you're constantly in this cycle, and that over-encompassing circular motion is again a continual improvement approach to things. So you're planning, you're doing, you're checking, you're testing, and then you're acting on those test results and your metrics and reporting, and you're improving over time.
Okay, so in summary, what we try to do when we speak with clients and work with them in DR and on the business cases, and what we've tried to do here is help you understand when is moving to cloud DR worth the effort. And I think the takeaway points that Greg and I have tried to share here are, first and foremost, to avoid much of the capital expenditure required by legacy DR hosting and periodic capital expenses by refreshes. That is a wonderful thing to CFOs all by itself. Another is the ability to push lower level IT responsibilities to the provider and realign your IT staff. So you can say, yes, we're taking steps to get out of the business of IT. And that's a wonderful thing to redeploy. It's not, many CEOs would not consider part of the core business.
In securing your data is critical. So doing that through contractual obligations and reporting instead of direct ownership. And a point that I didn't make earlier is that in relation to the SLAs and the agreements, you need to ensure that you're business driven and largely out of your business impact analysis exercises, that your MTD, maximum tolerable downtime, your recovery time objectives and recovery point objectives are capable of being met by your provider. So that is an important item. and mind your data, not just protect your data, but understand where it is, as noted earlier, especially if you're governed by strict compliance requirements for sensitive data. And a point we'd also like to make here at the end here is that cloud it's quicker to build, right? This is another benefit. We touched on it slightly, but it's quicker. You can spin up services, spin down services cost effectively. You can pre-configure and script. So one of the benefits here, if you viewed your DR environment as kind of a warm standby sort of mode, or even cold, right, where you have an option of having something built already, but also having something configured within the cloud and triggered based on an event, or just for you to activate when needed and to turn that script on and build your environment, right? That's the most cost-effective way, not the most highly available or quickest recovery time, but certainly an option and something to consider.
So Greg and I would like to thank you for your time. We welcome any sort of questions. Megan?
Thank you, John. We did receive a question from the attendees during your presentation. So how can someone tell if an app is a good first app for Cloud DR?
So first app for Cloud DR. I would say something that either is requiring a hardware refresh, something that provides the CapEx avoidance, because that's a key to the business case. So either it is driving that, or its move to Cloud DR will still help the avoidance. If it's shared storage, it doesn't necessarily have to be the problem child, but if it frees up on-premise storage such that you can push off that expansion for 2 years, that's a goal that senior management probably feels is worth chasing. Another clue could be maybe big databases, or bigger growing databases. Could be something that's consuming storage but isn't the most valuable storage consumer on the block, and that's sort of irritating, again, with the goal of capital avoidance. Greg, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think an additional one, John, would be a situation where it's maybe not considered a critical app, where the company has not invested in DR because of the cost, but still an important application. But now with the cloud, they have a cost-effective way of doing it, similar to the point I made around pre-configuring and not spinning up the services and not paying for them. You just got a configuration there. So I think now that there is this entry into, kind of providing a DR capability for something that maybe in the past was just too costly, I think that's another potential area.
Good. And we're not, in the scenario, we're recommending these be business applications, not IT infrastructure per se, because you don't want to, it's not a strong business case if it's likely or would be a good candidate for moving to a SaaS solution, where you just get rid of that business process altogether and you move it to Workday, to Concur, Salesforce.com, or even email. It might not be worth the bother if you're really on the fence, or SaaS transformation would be a better fit. Thank you for that question. I appreciate it. Megan, do we have any others?
No, that's it. So I wanted to go ahead and thank you both, John and Greg. To everyone else, as a quick reminder, if you did not download the presentation and would like a copy, please do so now in the handout section. We hope you found this webinar informative and that you will join us for future webinars. You'll see a short 6-question survey in just a few minutes after the webinar ends. If you could please provide any feedback on today's event, we really value your input, and thank you for your participation.